Hello, my name is Miss Sperotto. I'm a conductor for the Sarasota Youth Orchestras, and I am also the orchestra teacher at Rowlett Middle Academy. Today we're going to start learning about how to start learning a new piece of music. So before you even begin any of that when you're at home, you need to make sure that you have the things to do the job. It's kind of important. So a list of things that I personally would recommend that you have at your disposal while you're beginning to learn a new piece of music are the following. Your instrument, definitely a metronome and a tuner. And sometimes you can even get devices where it's a metronome and a tuner at the same time. Just kind of depends. You can also have them separately. I would also recommend having something that you can record and film yourself. Honestly, the easiest thing you can do in this regard is having your cell phone or maybe an iPad, because listening and watching yourself, you'll learn a lot from what you're doing and how to correct it if you need to. Now, luckily, we live in a world where you can have all of those things, except for your instrument, on your phone. There's a lot of free apps out there where you can have all of those things I just talked about at your disposal very easily. If you don't have a cell phone at home and you also don't have a metronome, but you do have internet access, you still have access to a metronome then. Yes. I highly recommend for a metronome going onto Google and in the search bar put free online metronome, and the screen that's going to pop up is a little slidey bar, and you can adjust the tempo and hit play, and you have a free metronome as long as you have some internet and computer access. That's pretty easy. The other one that I would recommend for an online tuner is Tuner Ninja. It also has a needle, which will tell you if you're too high or too low. Even if you're not super experienced with tuning, you still have something that can tell you which direction you need to go in. Some other things I would recommend to have when you're about to start a new piece is to have something that'll play a drone in the background. I really like using cello drones. This is the CD version, but you can also find these on YouTube online. You don't have to purchase this. You can find it for free. All you have to do in the search bar of YouTube is just put in cello drones, and that's going to help you practice. This will definitely help you with your intonation, and it also helps you with your scales. So check that out. And then there's just the basics. Like, you need a pencil. You should always have a pencil with you when you're practicing. Always. And you should have one at rehearsal too. Just saying. Some other things that might help you are maybe a practice mute. So a practice mute in the string world, it looks like this depending on the instrument that you're playing. This one is metal, but they also come in rubber. Metal ones are pretty heavy and they do dampen the sound a little bit more than a rubber one. And the reason you would use a practice mute is that if you put it on the bridge of your instrument, it literally dampens the sound. So the reason they make these is because the person in the next room over can't really hear you that much. So I highly recommend this, especially if you have little brothers and sisters at home that take naps during the day and that's like the best time for you to practice. Try one of these and maybe practicing on the other side of the house. You're not going to wake up, I promise you. Another thing that could help you a lot is a mirror when you're practicing. Sometimes it really helps just to check your position, because that might help you learn that piece of music, because maybe you have to position yourself in a certain way and you need to make sure you're doing it correctly. Mirrors help quite a bit. And then there's the obvious ones. Make sure you have all the necessary accessories for your instrument. So if you're a string player, make sure you have rosin. Make sure you have your shoulder rest. Make sure you have your little cello strap or rock stock, whatever it is you like to use. If you're a woodwind or a brass player, make sure you have extra reeds. You have to make sure you have all these things to be successful. So set yourself up for success. Make sure you have everything ready. One last thing, it is not required, but I always feel like I do a lot better with it. Make sure you have some water with you. It helps me keep going. There's a llama on it. There might be some other little things for your instrument, or maybe some things that you feel better when they're there around you. Just do whatever it is you need to do to be ready to practice and just be present with your practicing. Once you have the piece that you know you want to learn, you kind of need to get a feel for it. Like, what's going on with it? So my suggestion to you is to listen to recordings and also try to make sure you listen to more than one. There might be one that you really like, but then try to listen to some other ones too. Maybe even listen to some recordings of people your own age who also played that same exact thing. Just listen to it, see what it is. There might be things that you really like about it and not. But still knowing that, I think, is going to be helpful. So the more you can listen to that piece, you should do it. The other thing is I would definitely watch people performing it. If there's a live performance of that piece, totally watch it. There's a lot of things, especially I think as a string player, that you see with the bows. You can see what do their bowings look like in that part. What kind of a bow stroke are they doing? Or, oh, maybe this section is really quiet. What do they look like? How much bow are they using? Like, there's so many things you can learn just by watching a performance. Actually, another thing to do is, this is like totally extra, watch their performance without the sound going. Because you can actually learn a lot from someone's performance just by looking at them play. So I would actually do both of those things because you can actually learn a lot by how someone's playing just by watching them. It's super beneficial. Another thing I recommend is while you're listening and watching these performances, make sure you have your music out and you're actually following along, and you can even make notes with the pencil that you have with you. Maybe there's a recording that you really found that you liked, and in your piece a certain dynamic isn't there, but maybe this performer decided to add a dynamic. Maybe they're using a lot of bow and you want to make a note there. Have your music out with it. I think it is good to just passively listen to it. Like, sometimes if I'm really getting to know a piece, I'll just have it on in the background. You're just cleaning your room, just have the piece on so it can just like osmosis itself in there. But then there's actually studying it. So do both. They're both beneficial. And then the last thing I really recommend when you're really trying to get to know a piece is do some research on your composer. Like, what was going on in their life during the time this was written? Were they having a really good time? They were really sad? Some stuff was going on? You kind of need to know that, and that's actually going to help you play it. It can really tell you a lot. Now, the next thing that I would suggest when you're starting to learn a new piece is to make sure you're warmed up. Now, there's going to be another video about setting practice routines, but I think that this is really going to be helpful for you. Once you know the piece, and you've listened to it, and you've watched it, and you've researched it, then really make sure that you have that practice routine ready to go. Some suggestions for you. This is a personal preference. I like to physically warm up before I start playing. I know a lot of musicians tend to hold tension in different areas of their body. Mine is my hands and my wrists, and my neck and my shoulders, which are very common. There's a bunch of different things you can do to help physically warm up, and that's also going to help you with injury prevention. There is going to be another video on injury prevention, and this kind of ties into that with your warm-up. I personally am a musician who does have music-related injuries, which is why I have so many issues with my wrist. And it's also the reason I don't conduct with a baton. So if you ever wonder that, that's why. So please make sure you're warming up beforehand. Warming up with open strings and then warming up with the different bow strokes that you may have seen in the piece that you're beginning to learn is going to actually help you when you're going and learning that piece for the first time, because you're warming up with it now to help you just a little bit later, and it might even be just 5 minutes later, but anything you do to help bridge that gap will be helpful. Another thing I would recommend is to practice your scales. Make sure in a piece you're beginning how to learn, you know what key it's going to be in. That's like really important. This is definitely where the cello drones or some kind of drone in the background will definitely help you, so you can also make sure that your left hand is getting in tune. So with this warm-up, you've stretched your body, you've worked on your right hand with open strings and make sure you have the correct bow strokes, and then you also work on your left hand with scales. You can combine the two with scales and bow strokes and rhythms and everything in this time, whatever works for you, but just make sure some kind of element in the piece you're about to learn or starting to learn is in there, so it's nice. The next point I want to make is to pay attention to those little things. There's a saying that goes, the devil is in the details. And you may have heard it and you may not have, but basically what that means is something may look seemingly easy until you pay attention to those little details and you realize that it's much more complicated than it actually is. The thing in music is if you pay attention to the little things in the music, that's what's going to make it musical and beautiful, and it's going to make you want to play it more, and it's going to make it more expressive, and people are going to listen to it. You have to do those things. So this is something that when you're paying attention to those little details, you can do it in the listening and watching phase that we discussed earlier, but also you can do it while you're actually playing too, because sometimes you don't realize it until you actually get into it and you're like, oh dang. So what kind of details am I talking about? It can be something like fingerings, dynamics, articulations like accents and slurs and crescendos and decrescendos, time signatures. What key are you in? Oh my gosh, please make sure you know what key you're in. Do you have any repeated sections? What are your bowings? Where do you take a breath? Where's your phrase supposed to be? I mean, these are things that make music and make you want to listen to it. So those little details need to happen in order to make it musical. Also, you have to think of it this way. You don't want to learn something incorrectly. I can speak from more than once personal experience where I've had a teacher assign something to me before the summer started. Here, Miss Sperotto. They didn't call me back then. Please practice this piece over the summer, and when you come back, we'll see what you did and we'll work on it then. Great. So I'd practice it all throughout the summer thinking, oh, I'm doing this correctly and I don't need to know all these other things. And then I get back to my lessons during the school year and I had to completely relearn the piece. And it's because I didn't take time to figure out those little details beforehand. Please do that. Do it for the music. And honestly, having to relearn a piece that you thought you had correct is one of the most frustrating things ever. So do yourself a favor and just get all those details figured out ahead of time and make sure you learn them correctly. So, okay, you're all set up. You've done the research. You've figured out your little details and whatever it is you need to do in this piece. And now you're all set up and you're ready to go. What do you do now? One of the things that I actually find difficult about starting a new piece is that you're essentially sight reading. Now, I love sight reading. It's one of my favorite things to do, but when you're not in an orchestral setting and you're not with the rest of your section, especially as a string player, where you have like a whole bunch of people with you to kind of support you, it's actually hard. It's okay, and it's really good practice to do this on your own. Sarasota Orchestra is going to have another video about practicing notes and sight reading and theory. If that's something and you know that you might need a little bit more work in that area, make sure you go check out that video as well. My suggestion to you, since you're essentially learning and sight reading a piece on your own for the first time, is set little goals for yourself and break up the piece into sections or chunks. Depending on the piece that you pick, you might go by phrases, like maybe there's 8-bar phrases in this piece. You can do 8 bars at a time, and if you can handle that, you're like, I got this, then do 8 bars at a time, but only focus on that day for those 8 bars. And make sure those 8 bars are as awesome as you can get them. Now let's say, for an example, in those 8 bars, there's a lot happening, and you're like, I can't even get through the first 2 bars. Okay, then just do 2 measures. That's fine. There's been times, and I've literally worked on 1 measure at a time, because within that measure, there were so many things going on that I just needed to spend the time on it. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. If it takes you 15 minutes to work out one measure, be it because of the rhythms or the bowings, or maybe there's this giant crescendo, just take the time and do it. It's your practice time. But if you, by the end of it, have nailed that one measure, good for you. Persistence. So practice in chunks, and you can decide the size of that chunk. I'm just going to stop saying the word chunks. Chunks. It's like one of those words when you hear it and you're like, ugh. So you've got your sections nailed down. You're like, okay, I'm just going to do like 3-4 measures, something like that. Okay, great. Now you need to practice slowly. I am just as guilty as this. I think any musician is guilty of this. Everyone has done this before, where they get their piece and they're all situated and they know what little section, not chunk, they're going to be practicing, and they're like, I'm going to play this as fast as I can. Yeah, don't do that. Not everything's supposed to be fast, first of all. And if you practice it slowly, you're going to be able to play it quickly and like good. So here's a game that I suggest. My teacher in college taught this to me. If you've had me as an instructor before, you have heard me talk about this before, but it's worth reminding. It's called the penny method. Okay, so here's what happens in the penny method. You can do this with as many pennies as you want, but I suggest if you're just starting out and you're just starting to learn the piece, I suggest starting with 3 pennies. Also, if you don't have pennies, you can use paper clips, you can use buttons. Literally, it's just like 3 of something small. Actually, I think I've actually used pens and pencils before because that's what I had around me. That'll work too. Whatever. Pennies are great because they will fit on your music stand or at a counter around you. So here's how you play. You will have your pennies, and then the other thing you're going to need is a metronome. And I talked about in the beginning of the video already, like some metronome options that you have. So take that section that you're working on and have your metronome set at the very lowest setting. So for an example, for this one, the lowest setting on here is 40, which is dreadfully slow. And you're not going to like yourself very much for doing this, but I promise you it will help you. So set it to 40. Ugh. So slow. And what you're going to do is you're going to start playing your piece at this tempo. It's annoyingly slow. So the whole point of the game is to have these pennies in a little pile next to you. And every time you play through your little section one time through at the correct tempo correctly, then you get to slide 1 penny over. Yeah, did it. So let's say the first time you played it through, you did it at the tempo and you did it correctly. Great, you got 1 done. Let's say the next time you play it again and it is correct again. Yes, great. And let's say the 3rd time you play it, you mess up and you played it incorrect rhythm. And you gotta take all these pennies and you gotta start all over again. And you have to keep doing this penny method no matter what, until all 3 pennies are over here, and you can play it 3 times in a row at that tempo as perfect as you possibly can. Now you're probably like, why would you torture yourself like that? I've been trained to. Honestly though, it's to help organize you and to hold yourself accountable. A lot of times what happens, and this is again happened to me, I think all musicians have gone through this, is you will have your section and then you get to a point and you're like, it's good enough. Is it good enough for Bach? Would it be good enough for Mozart? The answer is probably no. So you need to make sure that you're holding yourself accountable so you're learning this piece correctly. We talked about that earlier as well. Let's say you get all 3 pennies across. You're like, yay, I did it at the most annoying tempo ever. Fantastic. So now what you get to do is with your metronome, you're going to move it about 5 clicks faster. So it was on 40, and then like next closest to 5 that I have is 44 beats per minute. So that sounds like this. You're probably thinking, oh my gosh, that sounds exactly the same. Yeah, you're right. And if you can practice it this slowly, then you'll be able to practice it quickly. Because later on, once you do this penny method, after a while, it'll get easier and easier and easier to get through it because you practice it correctly so many times that eventually you'll get up to like the tempo it's supposed to be. So eventually, the next thing you know it, you're at 90, and it might be a little easier to play, but you've gone through all that stuff and taken care of those little details slowly and have worked them out already. It can be tedious, but eventually the more you do it, the easier that process gets. And if you're one of those types of people, like myself, that needs to hold themselves accountable, the penny method is really the best. I've also seen it where people, especially if they're preparing for a performance, instead of using 3 pennies, they'll do like 10 pennies, 20 pennies. And I actually did that. I used to use like between 10 to 15 pennies when I had to memorize things. Because for me, memorization is a very difficult thing to do. So the next point I want to bring up is, okay, you're practicing and you have these little sections of the time and you're on a roll and you're like, yay, penny. And then after a while, you're kind of getting a little bored with it. Don't stop. Don't stop practicing. So this happens in all aspects of life where you start something and you're excited about it because it's new. We as humans like new things. We get really excited. We get excited when we go shopping because we have new clothes. We get excited about a new video game because we've never played it before and we haven't beat all the different levels or whatever. I don't know, I don't play video games. I cannot control the controllers. I can play like all these instruments and I can't do that. But anyways, this is not just with music this happens with all kinds of things. You need to keep pushing through and finish. Like you've started it and you're working hard and you've done all these things. You don't want to waste all these hours of the penny method just to give up on it. And a lot of times when people stop practicing their music or they stop a new piece, it's for a couple reasons. Maybe it's becoming too difficult for you, in which case maybe it's time to get a private teacher, which can always be helpful, or maybe seek some outside help to help you with it. Or maybe it's not too hard, but it's getting to a point where you're like, I'm not enjoying it as much. Keep going and find ways to make it enjoyable. So maybe you're just stuck in a practicing rut. Keep listening to recordings. Try to find some different patterns in the music. Find a new game to keep you interested. Maybe the penny method doesn't work for you. Find another one. Make up your own. Find another mind trick that you have that's going to help you stay interested in it so that you can finish it. And then another thing that could be good is give yourself little rewards. Like, oh, maybe at the end of these 2 weeks, I'm going to reward myself with X, Y, and Z. Whatever you're into. Do whatever you need to do to keep going so you can finish it. And there's a really good sense of accomplishment afterwards. Like, I learned that piece. And one last thing I want to talk about and touch on is performing. Sometimes maybe these little rewards or maybe these little games, they don't work for you, but maybe you need a goal. So maybe another way to do that is setting a goal of a performance. You don't want to stress yourself out with, I have to have this piece completely learned in 2 weeks. Slow your roll, okay? There's no rush here. But sometimes having those goals or deadlines, especially if that's something that motivates you as a person, can be extremely empowering. Once you feel confident with what you've learned, or maybe while you're learning it, have that goal of some sort of performance. And your audience that you're performing for doesn't even need to be a large audience. Like, it could literally be one person in your house. It could be a brother or a sister. It could be a mom or a dad, grandma or grandpa. Literally, you can do a whole bunch of different people. One person is still an audience. You know what? I'm sure they would absolutely love it if you played for them. I know that when people say, "Can I please play this for you?" I love it. Like, I absolutely love it. Now, I'm a little biased because I am a music teacher, but I like that kind of thing. I'm sure they would love it too. And another thing is, you have so many options now. You have FaceTime, you have Zoom, you have YouTube. Like, you can do any of these things. Maybe you don't have people around you in your household that you want to play with, but maybe it's a friend. Maybe it's family that's in another state. You can actually outreach to these people now and play for them, and you can record it and they'll have it forever. You have a lot of options with performances, right? Also, if you think about it, and we've seen it a lot, especially in these last few months, you have seen videos of people singing concerts from their balcony and giving concerts on their front lawns, and you see all these little things that are edited together and they're so much fun and beautiful to look at. The world can be your stage, and that does not have to be in a concert hall to still have it be an awesome performance. I wanted to thank you all for joining me today while I talk about how to start learning a new piece. I hope this was helpful, and please let us know at the Sarasota Orchestra if you have any questions. Thanks. Nice talking to you. Bye.